Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe here once again with your July update for Red Summit Advisors, and still plenty to talk about even during the heart of the summer. And I know El Nino's getting plenty of buzz around the water cooler or wherever you're hearing about it on the radio, on the internet, all these different things coming forward this time of year because we obviously want to know what the back part of the year is going to look like and going forward even into the next year of 2024. So some good stuff going forward. But first of all, let's start where we've been the past 30 days or so. And this map clearly shows you where it has not been raining. Wherever you're seeing the browns and the reds, that's where you have drier than average conditions going on for the past month. But where you're seeing the greens and the blues, well, obviously, that's been a different story. Much of Wyoming and then eastern Colorado and points to the east have been exceptionally wet. But the western part of the country has essentially been somewhat drier than average simply because the monsoon has not only been delayed, like I told you it was going to, but also diminished like I told you it was going to. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to have one. It just simply means that we're not cooking in terms of the monsoon right now, and that obviously plays a big role. So the next 15 days, so we'll take you through the next couple of weeks, we're still dealing with drier than average anomalies across southern portions of Arizona, parts of Utah, southwest Colorado, a large portion of New Mexico. And again, that's due to the lack of the monsoonal flow coming northward out of Mexico. A lot of that has been shoved off farther to the south, at least for the time being. So really for the next couple of weeks, I don't see a huge influx of monsoonal moisture, but I do think there will at least be some occasional showers and storms show up. You can see Utah, a lot of white on the map right there, along with northeast portions of Arizona, where we might actually get a couple of showers and storms in there. And if we can build on that, that does change things around in a hurry. However, here we are in the middle of July, and we really aren't seeing much of a flow at all. If we look forward at this in July and August, okay, so what this map is showing us is that historically speaking, from 1948 to 2021, when we've had a positive ENSO or an El Nino going on, wherever you're seeing the yellows and the reds, that's where we've had wetter than average conditions. And where you're seeing the greens and the blues, that's where we've had drier than average conditions. And historically speaking, when we have an El Nino setup like what we have, at least right now, and I say right now because that can always change down the road, we really don't have much of a monsoon to look forward to. That doesn't mean that there won't be one, but it means it is diminished from what we've seen over the past couple of years. And you can see in southern Arizona, obviously, we're dealing with a lot of blues and greens right there, as some of that green pops up into eastern portions of Utah, but eastern Utah obviously lights up just a little bit better. But really, some of the drier locations around are southern Arizona and far south Texas, and that's kind of how we've been rolling, at least for the time being. So I think to get it in proper context, we have to look at where we were back on May 8th. And that's what the sea surface temperature anomalies look like. We had some cooler than average water right off the west coast. I've got that blue arrow right there. We have the El Nino building here off the west coast of South America. And we have a big warm blob there in the north central Pacific. So again, that was back on May 8th. But if we look at where we are right now, not a ton has changed, but a couple of things certainly have. The El Nino has continued to build. You see that warmer than average water in some cases approaching 5 degrees Celsius above average for this time of year. And for that part of the ocean, that is definitely significant. We still have a little bit of cooler than average water off the south western coast of California down to just near Hawaii, but that is actually starting to shrink. And then the warmer than average water there in the North Pacific has made a run to the northeast, indicating that might continue to shrink some of that cooler than average water right there off the west coast. Either way you cut it, the powers that be right now are highlighted by those three arrows. And it's difficult to determine in the heart of summer simply which one is going to dominate. Now, with the El Nino being as strong as it is right now and continuing to build, you might say, well, it's easy to say, well, that's the El Nino. It's obviously the biggest and most important thing going on right now. But that isn't always the case, as you'll see here in just a little while. I do think the El Nino is going to continue to materialize, though. These are sea surface temperature anomaly forecasts from the Euro seasonal model for August. So you still see all of that orange and red right there along the equator and off the west coast of South America. And you also still see a little remnants of that cooler than average stuff west of the Baja, stretching out toward Hawaii. So if we go forward here to October to see if that changes, you can see that it eventually does right here. by eliminating some of that cooler than average water that I just showed you, but the El Nino is still going. But I do want you to watch right off the west coast of South America, where the real meat of this event has been with those really warm sea surface temperature anomalies. Watch what happens when we go to December. You still see it there, but the warmer than average pocket of +4 right there starts to shift farther west. And I think that's a hallmark of an El Nino that develops like this. It goes gangbusters right off the west coast of South America first, and then it gradually starts to shift. And the important thing about that shift is, what does that mean for us in terms of the development and the strength of this? Well, all of these or I should say, all those letters on the left hand side are the various computer models that look at this stuff. We have the Australian model, the top one, the Canadian, the European, the Japanese, France, NOAA, which is ours, and over in England, the UK Met Office. Okay, so that is the August forecast. They're all basically on the same page. The dashed red line right there technically meets El Nino criteria, but we've seen this surpass El Nino criteria now for a while. So if we look forward into September, you see that Bureau of Meteorology one, or the Australian model right there at the top left. That thing continues to really flex the El Nino, and you can see it brings it up to around 2.5 degrees Celsius above average. I think that is a little overzealous based on where we are right now. But even if it is, look at October. Some of these models are catching right up to the Australian model. And then if we go further into November, there we are. The France model, the Meteo model, it's right there with the Bureau of Meteorology. Other models are less strong, but they are still strong enough to where this El Nino is no doubt going to have an influence. It's important that we know where the warmer than average water is going to set up, because it really is a tell as to what this El Nino is going to mean for us. So there are three types. Let's start with the first one over here on the left, the traditional one, where the east based, where the warmer than average water sets up farther east. That's essentially where we are right now, because the warmer than average sea surface temperatures are bullseyed right there off the west coast of South America. If you look at the middle map, that is basically the upper level weather pattern as it shows for December through February. Okay, so where you're seeing the blues and the purples, that's just a big upper level low pressure area. It's a storm generator up there in the Gulf of Alaska that sends storms into the western and southern portion of the country. Okay, the bottom map right there are temperature anomalies. So where you're seeing the reds, that's where it's warmer than average with a traditional or east-based El Nino. And where you're seeing the greens and the blues, that's where it's cooler than average with a traditional east-based El Nino. Make sense? So if we have that, we go to the hybrid, which means it's an east central base, not quite out there too far to the west, not right there along the coast, but a little farther west than what we've just talked about. And you can see overall the pattern is the same. It definitely favors the southern tier of the country with the cooler than average and the more active weather pattern. But if you shift that warmer than average into the central Pacific and get a Modoki El Nino, which Modoki is a Japanese word meaning the same but different, meaning it's the same because it's an El Nino, it's just a different flavor of El Nino. It changes the weather pattern completely. You see the green and the yellow right there near California in the west. That's a ridge of high pressure. It doesn't necessarily favor the west coast with storminess or the far south and southwest with storminess. The storminess ends up in the eastern half of the country, basically, and you can see that that's where most of the cooler than average temperatures exist during that time. So you probably don't get talked about a lot in terms of the three different types here. And I think that's a big mistake, because it really it's different on how they set up in terms of what they mean for specific areas of the country. And that begs the question, well, what type is it going to be? We don't know yet. It has started out as a traditional. That's the one thing we know right now. Could it morph into a hybrid or a Modoki? Absolutely. We have seen some of those things happen in the past. So to jump on this right away and say it's only going to be a traditional, that's exactly what we're going to have. I think anybody that's telling you that right now is selling you a false bill of goods. I would definitely want to wait another month or so at least before we could see how this thing starts to behave and how the warmer than average anomalies are shifting around. So again, probably one of the more important points I'm going to make in this whole conversation. And if we look at historically positive ENSOs or El Nino episodes, okay, from 1948 through 2021, going from September of this year, it would be through December of the next year, wherever you're seeing the reds, In yellows, browns, whatever, that's wetter than average. Where you're seeing the greens and the blues, that's drier than average. So basically, from September right now, be this the end of 2023 into 2024. If we had this El Nino last, the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies would be drier than average. The desert Southwest and southern part of the country would be wetter than average. That's essentially what the broad perspective of El Nino brings to us. But as I said, not every El Nino is the same, and some of those El Nino episodes and flavors can be different. But I wanted to show that map to you because that's essentially what El Nino does. I'm going to show you the seasonal models, all right, the Euro and the NMME, but I want you to take them with a grain of salt because right now I don't think they have a great handle on what's happening. Okay, so for August, this is the Euro seasonal models forecast, precipitation wise. It's got the drier than average anomalies, Utah, Western Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, right there in the Four Corners area, but very few wetter than average places out there. I do agree that the drier than average conditions in the Southwest will probably continue to materialize simply because of what I've talked about. El Nino usually diminishes whatever type of monsoon that you have. So that's what August looks like. If we go to September, still the same type of deal. A little drier than average there in the West and the Southwest, simply because the El Nino has diminished the monsoon. We've got wetter than average there in the midsection. Okay, let's go to October. And we still have drier than average stuff out west. Now, here's the thing: if we have El Nino starting to really flex on us and impact the atmosphere as well as the ocean during that time, we're probably going to see the seasonal change hit, and the southern part of California through the Southwest is probably going to start to see a storm track be increasingly active. Okay, as I said, I don't think this model may necessarily has the best handle on things because even through November, it still has an average to slightly drier than average flavor over the west and the southwest, and wetter than average stuff is on the southeast coast. Okay, if we look at December, again, the wet is farther east. That would make this type of El Nino more of a Madoki look, where you're drier than average across west and you're wetter than average out east. So it's kind of doing a little bit of guesswork here, I think, in terms of what type of El Nino would have. And then if we go into January, you see it lights up California, dries out the Pacific Northwest, and we would have storms going across the southern tier of the country. So if the model doesn't know what type of El Nino this is going to be, and I really don't think it does at this point, it's tough to project where these precipitation anomalies are going to be. So that's why I'm saying we have to take them with a grain of salt, at least for right now. The NMME, I would use the same caution on something like this. This is August. You can see a large part of the West is in the white or average in terms of precipitation, even a little drier than average there across southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. But as I said, I still think the monsoon will be lesser than what we have had the past couple of years. I think, well, it already is lesser than we've had the past couple of years. September, a little bit drier than average there in the Southwest, nothing crazy. East Texas up through the midsection of the country, a little wetter than average. And then we go in October, and it paints a pretty dry scenario out there across the western half of the United States. And as I said, I'm not entirely sure I agree with that just now. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that I'd like to see more evidence that that's how things are going to roll. And then we go into November, and you see there's a little wetter than average bullseye there in Northern California, a little drier than average across the Four Corner states. But look up here across western parts of Canada in British Columbia, a real dry signal right there, which again would be a hallmark of a strong traditional El Nino. And then as we go into December, Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, eastward into Idaho, western Montana would be drier than average. Again, that's very classic in terms of an El Nino. We have average to wetter than average across Southern California and across the southern tier of the United States. And then if we look at January, again, we have a parade of storms coming in from the west where we really don't have a dry signal popping up anywhere. So that's what I'm saying. We have to kind of wait this out at least a little while longer. I still want to show them to you. I still want to walk you through them. I just think we need to wait on the deciding factors here a little bit. Another model, August, September, October here with the IRI multi-model ensemble. It again has that weak monsoon signal there with the drier than average flavor there across southern Utah, Arizona, down into Nevada and Southeast California. That's really the only drier than average area it had during that time. And then as we move to October, November, December, again, there are a couple of pockets in the West, but it really lights up most of Texas and the Gulf Coast. And again, that would definitely be an indicator that El Nino is driving the ship right there. Okay. So in summary, El Nino continues to develop, but the warmest water right now is east. So we're focusing on a traditional El Nino, at least for right now. It's too early to tell what kind of event this will be or how long it'll last. And that really prevents accurate analoging for right now, too. So that's why I have in bold and underlined in italics, take those seasonal models with a grain of salt, at least for right now. The PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, it's still negative, probably isn't going to do a full on phase shift, but it will likely moderate going forward. Okay, so we're still watching that. And I think we have to be mindful that we shouldn't put all of our eggs in the El Nino basket, so to speak. Every event is different and can produce those unexpected impacts. Look what happened in California last year with the La Nina episode, which 8 out of 10 La Ninas usually portend drier than average conditions for California, and they had anything but that. And as I kind of alluded to through this video, early fall should give us an indication of how this event sets up. By that I'm saying, are we seeing the warmer than average water shift a little bit farther west? Are we seeing something else change or build or whatnot? And I think that that's an important thing to look at going forward. So I know some people say, well, this is really non-committal in terms of what the event's going to be, what the rain or snow is going to end up being. And you're absolutely right. It is non-committal. And it's non-committal for a reason, because I don't think we have enough evidence for us to be committed to one particular scenario. So I'm hoping to make that happen over the next few months or so, obviously, as we head toward sign up dates for the PRF program and whatnot. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Other than that, though, folks, that's all I have for this month, and I will catch you again next month. Have a nice evening.